What's going on, everybody? This is Inside the Burrow via the FAU Owl's Nest YouTube channel. My name is Jacob Kelly, joined here today with Zach Weinberger and JJ Metz. JJ, how you doing, man?
Doing great. Very excited to get into this episode. This FAU team is looking very good under Coach Tom Herman. How have you been doing, Zach?
I'm great. I'm ready for the season to start already. Everybody's eager to go. I'm eager to start the pod. Let's do it.
Yeah, it's a long off season that not to throw shots at baseball, but when the only sport to watch is baseball, it starts to drag on, and you really start looking forward to those little moments, glimpses of hope for football to be back. And that first little glimpse of hope is the fall camp starting next week, either the second or the third. That has yet to be officially confirmed, but that is what we're going to be talking about today. FAU getting prepared to start fall camp, and this will be a little preview for that. And what we're going to do, we're going to go down position groups, starting with quarterback, running back, wide receiver, go talk a little bit about the defense. And before we start, I'd like to give another thanks to Coach Ed Warner, who joined us yesterday on the pod, the offensive line coach and the run game coordinator. Gave us some really good conversation, a lot of good answers to questions that we didn't even ask. He just kind of just kept going and going and going, and it was such a refreshing interview. So if you haven't done so already, after done watching this, go over and click over there and watch that interview. You will not regret it. But gentlemen, we're going to start, like I just mentioned, with the quarterback position, and everything points to Casey Thompson being the starter. Something that Coach Ed Warner let us in on yesterday was how much they plan to use the RPO offense. And we've seen some mobility in Thompson for the years at Texas and Nebraska. And he came in a little bit after the spring game, if I'm not mistaken. And just every sign points to him being the guy. I feel a little bit bad for Daniel Richardson, who I think was sold on the idea of coming to FAU on the basis of he be coming home to Miami area and be able to get that starting spot. However, I can't really see a world where Casey Thompson doesn't end up as a starter.
Yeah, for sure. Looking at Casey, he was very, very good at Nebraska last year. And he was recruited by Coach Herman at Texas, so it was a huge reason why he came down to FAU. When he was at Nebraska last year, his stats speak for themselves. Casey Thompson, he threw for over 2,400 yards, had 17 touchdowns and 10 interceptions, and a QBR of 65, which was top 55 in the FBS. He had some really good games. That game against Iowa, rival game, he threw 20 for 30 on completions, 3 touchdowns in a win, 24-17 against Iowa. And that game really prevented Iowa from winning the Big Ten West. And he really did very well, throwing for over 280 yards in that one. So that was a great game. And Casey, he's been so good this last year. Another really standout game was 354 yards and 2 touchdowns against Purdue in a 43-37 loss. But Casey, he throws the ball a lot. One thing I think he can improve on is rushing. The best game that he rushed for was 33 yards against Wisconsin. And really, I think that he's going to take up the rushing game and be a lot better at FAU as opposed to Nebraska and Texas.
Yeah, I definitely agree with what you guys said. It kind of reminds me of the situation a couple years ago when Coach Taggart, formerly here, got N'Kosi Perry. Same situation in the regards of those two both missing spring, but the talent and just what the acquisition means, you would think that it was kind of a waste of a get if he's not starting week 1 or starting most games. But in this case, N'Kosi Perry had 2 seasons, and I think only Casey Thompson only has 1 year left of eligibility. So I feel like if he's not starting most games, or if not week 1, then it's, goes in sort of the bag. But I think the familiarity with Coach Herman, and while he still has to learn Charlie Fry's offense, the familiarity of what he wants to run is still going to be there. And we're going to talk about the different position groups already, but I think he has a pretty good offense around him. And I think because going down from Nebraska to the AAC and still a tough level of competition, but I think he can do well against what the competition will be in the AAC. So I think it's interesting, even though I will say the difference between those two situations for me is that the competition when N'Kosi Perry was there was not as great as it is now. I do think Daniel Richardson has earned that spot of being in the conversation of a possible week 1 starter. He really showed in the spring game and just practices before that when I was there just firsthand. So I do think it'll be a very interesting fall camp between those two, but you would think that Thompson will be the guy week 1.
Yeah, competition.
for sure.
Competition's
I mean,
always
Casey
positive when you get to camp. When you have a lot of talented guys, a lot of guys who are capable of going out there and being the guy. It's never really a bad thing. Now, you don't want to be in a situation where you're starting one guy the one game and seeing how he goes, and then the next game it's up in the air. You want that one concise leader who's going to go out there, and certainly what you're getting from Casey Thompson compared to N'Kosi Perry is you're getting a much more consistent thrower. You're getting a lot more efficient thrower. You look at his 4 years in his career, you got 66% completion percentage, 70%, 63, and a 63% last year compared to N'Kosi Perry, who, while he does have more yards, had more yards last season when 2,700, was a lot more inefficient behind a pretty solid offensive line. Again, something that we talked about yesterday with Ed Warner was just the improvement we've seen from the time he came to the program in 2021 to today, where that offensive line really cleaned up last year. So Casey Thompson, if he can just maintain that 63% and maybe reach that to between 63 to 66%, getting that upgrade from N'Kosi Perry will be huge to just lead the offense. And we know he's going to get support from the running game. So there's a lot on the quarterback's shoulders just to move the ball along and carry the offense, where he shouldn't be asked to make a lot of plays on his own.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I agree a lot with what Zach said. It really reminds me of the Willie Taggart Jr. and N'Kosi Perry. I mean, N'Kosi really deserves the starting spot in that. But Daniel Richardson, a couple things that he can improve on. He was at Central Michigan. He threw for 2,000 yards last year, 15 touchdowns to 5 interceptions. But he's not accurate at all. He was 40.7 QBR, which was one of the worst in the FBS. He completed less than 50% of his passes. So I expect Casey to get the starting role at FAU, and I don't think he'll be able to do that much in terms of throwing with the three-headed monster of our rushing game.
Yeah,
definitely agree.
Yeah, and you look at Daniel Richardson and the differences between the two, which kind of make it clear why he isn't going to be probably considered for the starting job. Is probably going to ultimately be Casey Thompson. He does have, like you mentioned, Zach, that extra year eligibility, whereas Casey Thompson likely only going to be here for 1 year. So you have the guy who clearly is the better of the two. There's no point on just resting on your morals and seeing what you have in Daniel Richardson. You went out and I remember. I think it was March when we brought him in. Was it April? I forget exactly when it was, but there was some whispers going around that there was a Power 5 quarterback in the building, and that kind of perks everybody's ears up, and that obviously ends up being Casey Thompson. So I mean, he's a bigger athlete. He's more athletic. You look at Daniel Richardson, only 5'10". You got Casey Thompson, who's 6'1", 6'2", is very familiar with Tom Herman. I think it's just so very clear. Daniel Richardson would really have to come in and improve on some of the things that you just mentioned, JJ. That accuracy, you're looking at 56% last year. That's just not going to cut it. A step down from N'Kosi, who N'Kosi had his moments, but sometimes left you asking for more. To drop from 58 down to 56, that's just not the direction the offense needs to be going in.
Well, let's also be honest here. I do think, which I agree, N'Kosi Perry was very inconsistent, because I remember when the first 3 games of his FAU career happened, and I remember even myself thinking, this could be a very monster season for him, and then he faces the real competition. I hope that Casey, and I believe he will, he's going to gain that chemistry with the guys, because that was the big question mark with N'Kosi Perry. You missed the whole spring. You're not going to know these guys very well, your teammates. That's why that second season, N'Kosi Perry, he looked a little more unrattled than he did the first season. So I'm hoping that with that, but plus the Willie Taggart offense was really just inept at a lot of points. So you're hoping that Charlie Fry and you're hoping that Tom Herman offense could be way better. You looking from, again, back-to-back 5-win seasons is not what Tom Herman wants to do. Obviously, you're trying to bring in a different energy here. So I do think Casey Thompson is part of that culture, and I think he could do it. So we'll see. It's still going to be an interesting camp nonetheless.
Yeah, and to add on briefly on that, Zach, Coach Warner said that Casey knows this tough offense already because he was at Texas with Coach Herman. So he doesn't really have to learn a full new offense because at Texas, Coach Herman has the same offense. So different from Nicosi at Miami and didn't have too much experience with Coach Taggart. And that's why I think that Casey will turn out to be the better quarterback over Nicosi Perry, so excited for that.
Just to push back a little bit, which JJ, you're right. Charlie Fry's offense will be a little different. That's why I do think that he's still going to have to learn a playbook, right? It's not going to just he remembers the plays from Texas, especially when he looked in Nebraska. It's still going to be a learning method for everybody, right? Because it's obviously everybody's first season in FAU, everybody's first season in the AAC. So it's going to be interesting. But again, we're going to talk about it now, but I'm really excited to talk about the skill position players, because I think that's where really FAU is going to thrive.
Yeah, it is. I really expect that to be the strong suit of the team, especially with starting off with the running back group. You have now two guys that have rushed over 1,000 yards. Kobe Lewis did it back in 2019, getting 1,074, and Larry McCammon III last year getting 1,004. And there was a worry that Larry McCammon was going to be leaving the team, enter the transfer portal earlier on in the spring, but he stays. So you have Kobe Lewis, you have the mainstay of Larry McCammon. You have a very talented running back group even behind him. It was Barry Mobley who showed a lot of promise last year. So I think the running back group is the best of the skill positions group on this team.
No, absolutely. It's been a blessing, but maybe also a curse, possibly, because the past couple seasons, we've had that was one of the big positions that had a lot of depth, besides Larry McCammon as well. So you just don't want to have sort of a system where if a guy is really hot and you go to another running back, it's just going to ruin the momentum. I do think, though, that Tom Herman and especially Ed Warner, who's the run game coordinator, I think they know how to use running backs, and it's going to be a huge thing about this team. Because Casey Thompson, right, people are going to look at that acquisition and be like, this is going to be a pass-heavy team. I don't think so. I think this is going to be either a really heavy team, or maybe they're going to lean into the run a lot because people are going to expect Casey to throw. So, again, I think that there's a three-headed monster in the running back crew. And, again, even Ed Warner told us, yesterday, you have three guys that are capable of rushing for 1,000 yards. And I think that's very true. I don't think that's hyperbole.
Yeah, and I totally agree. I expect the three to share the same amount of work with carries. I think they can all get around that 10 to 15 carries a game. Larry, what he did last year was really, really good. He rushed for over 1,000 yards, and his best game was against Western Kentucky, where he rushed for 127 yards on 16 carries, 2 touchdowns, and averaging 8 yards a carry. So Larry, what he did last year was really, really impressive, and I expect him to do the same this year as well.
Yeah, 100%. There's much worse situations than you could find yourself being in than where you're coming back from a season where you had 2 guys averaging over 5 yards per carry, and you bring in another guy in Kobe Lewis coming from a Power 5 school of Purdue, who at one point found 1,000 yards himself. You want, like we just mentioned with the quarterback position, you want to go into camp and look at your guys and not know who you're going to start on the basis of we're just blessed and rich with talent. You can hand the ball off to any guy, any of those 3, and feel very comfortable they're going to pick up a lot of yards for you. We again, talking with Coach Ed yesterday, he's talking about giving 50 some odd carries a game, and he's really they're looking to throw the ball even still 30 times at that point. So what we could see from that is both an offense that expects to have a high volume of plays, but then even beyond that, a high volume of rushing attack plays where you can give it to any 3 of those guys on any sort of play, and I think you have a pretty good shot.
No, absolutely. It also helps, I think, that Larry mentioned in the AAC Media Day, that it helps when you're. He said, I think he said anybody can do it behind the offensive line that we got. You know what I'm saying? And obviously, it's all, again, it's a team sport, right? So it's not Larry McCammon, him just by himself running through the holes. Who has to make the holes, right? And I think that, again, just Ed Warner's run game scheme and what that's been the strength of this team. There's been a lot of problems with the team the past couple of years in the Willie Taggart era that you can blame. The run game, you know, one of the problems is maybe they didn't lean on it enough, you know. So, and I think Herman sees that, and I think he's definitely gonna channel that in. And again, that three-headed room is gonna be really one to watch this season. And again, usually the running backs are a very energetic group during practice and what they do. I am excited to see what practice could be like for those three guys and when scrimmages come. And but like JJ said, you know, we'll see how many carries each of those guys get a game. That's going to be very interesting to see how much. But again, when you have a guy like Larry McCammon, you know, he's been the guy where, like, every time after post game, he's just iced up. You know what I'm saying? He has the body to really be that sort of power horse. You know what I'm saying, at the running back position. But again, how can you not give the ball to those other two guys? So it's going to be fun to watch.
It certainly is. Sorry, go ahead, JJ.
Yeah, and speaking of the offensive line, one guy in particular that I'm really looking at is Jordan Church, the highest offensive lineman recruit FAU has got in history, according to On3 and 247 Sports. Jordan, he was 6'4", 330 coming out of high school. He had offers from Tennessee and Louisville, two Power 5 schools. But what he did do this offseason is he lost 20 pounds of weight, so really excited for him, and he's going to be a bit faster in terms of the offensive line. I also his best blocking on the offensive line, his best trait is rushing. He's a very good rush blocker, running blocker, and really think that Jordan is a huge impact on this team.
Yeah, you know, and just kind of going into that, I mean, the offensive line, besides Church, and he mentioned how big of a recruit that is. I think the one really cool thing about this offensive line that Coach Ed kind of alluded to, but really you could kind of just see when you look at the roster, it's filled with a lot of experienced guys and a lot of guys that have talent. So you look at a guy like Kamar Bell and Andre Lamas and Alex Akovich, and these guys that you can plug and play at any position along the line, and they can just play really hard. And again, it just, the consistency of having Ed Warner throughout different coaches is really going to help just the guys, you know, tenfold. So again, the offensive line was a strength the past couple seasons, and especially last season, and I expect it to be one this season as well. So it's going to be a fun one.
Yeah, Coach Ed yesterday talking about all those traits that he finds important in an offensive lineman. You know, the hands, the ability to move the feet quick. Obviously, we want some meat on the bones. You look at just the prototype of every single offensive lineman, every single guy across the roster, pretty much. You look at 6'4", 6'4", 6'4", 6'5", 6'8", 6'6", 6'6". Like, these are some large men. The lightest of the group, 300 pounds. You go from 300 pounds to 325 pounds. So you have a very consistent range for everybody on that line. They all look the same. They all walk the same. And Ed was just yesterday so excited to talk about that group, and a group of guys that, you know, the offensive line in general, you know, across football probably doesn't get enough credit for what they can do. If your offensive line is not up to par, you could have Tom Brady back there at quarterback, but if your offensive line can't hold up, then, you know, what is he going to do? What offense can be run if your quarterback doesn't have time, your running backs can't get in between the holes? So that was the one mainstay over the last season, and now going into this year, that you knew those guys were going to be there, and then teams continue to add talent. So it's a lot of excitement. It's a lot of excitement from every single position group. You know, you go from quarterback, running back, offensive line. Now, I am really intrigued for the wide receiver group, what ends up happening. So LaJohntay Wester, last year, the number one receiver on the team. Number two receiver Jamal Edrin leaves. It goes to the transfer portal. So do you guys have any inclinations as to, behind LaJohntay, who that number two receiver would be?
Want to take that, JJ? Should I go?
You can go.
All right, sounds good. Yeah, I mean, listen, we've really seen just a lot of guys kind of cycle in and out the past couple seasons, and just again, we know LeJohntay's gonna be the number one guy. I still feel like it's gonna be Jaquan Burton, for that number two spot. But again, just kind of even looking at the roster, again, it's just guys that really showed out last year, like an Acion Cobb, a Jay Platt, Tony Johnson. Those guys at training camp last season was really making a lot of plays and having that chemistry with N'Kosi Perry, and then they really developed that. So again, it's like one of those things where if you take away LeJohntay Wester, you better be prepared to take out these other guys as well, and not too focused on LeJohntay Wester, because again, he can get 10 catches a game, sure, but like if you see Tony Johnson doing a streak down the field, I mean, he's wide open, then it's going to be donezo for the other team. So I think that the depth at wide receiver was, and this was a problem a couple years ago, and the amount of drop passes we see. I don't want to give FAU fans PTSD or anything, but that Marshall game where it was like 5 drop passes, and I think we only lost by three points or a touchdown score that game. I could be wrong, but yeah, I mean, it was like now it's like FAU fans feel pretty good about the wide receiver position. And again, even minus Jamal Edrin, which I really liked his size. But I do think that there's other guys there that can complement that size as well, to complement, kind of LeJohntay Wester's sort of unorthodox sort of style of play. But it works. You know what I'm saying? The past couple of years have been really exciting to watch. So again, Casey Thompson, I think he comes into a situation where it's built to have him succeed in the passing game. So I do feel that the wide receiver group is looking really good heading into the season.
Yeah, I mean, I really like this wide receiver group. And just to mention LeJohntay Wester, I think he's the best receiver in the American Athletic Conference. He led the league in the Conference USA in receiving yards throughout the first 10 weeks of the season. LeJohntay last year, 62 receptions, 719 yards. One game where he really, really stepped up was against Southeast Louisiana, where he had 8 receptions for 141 yards. And I see LeJohntay, he's like a 5'11 guy, very, very sneaky, fast, and he can catch the ball really on anything. Very good hands and very, very fast. His route running, there's questions on that. I think it's very, very good, but probably that's his biggest strength is probably his speed. Very, very fast.
And I do think the team is going to be missing what they got in Jamal Edrin. You're talking about a guy who's 6'3", 210 pounds. Nobody really on the roster stacks up to that. You have LeJohntay, who, dripping wet, is about 170 pounds. Jaquan Burton, you're looking at 180, 185. You're looking at some quick guys, some guys that have speed that if you get the ball in their hands, they can prove to be really dangerous. But FAU last year ran a lot of trips one side and then Jamal by himself on the other. And we saw a lot of jump balls go up to him, and that was his strong suit. I am just a little concerned about who on the team you're going to be able to replicate that with.
Well, I will say that's why guys like, I even mentioned BJ Alexander, who's I feel like besides Jamal Edrin really brought that size. You need a 6'3", 6'4" guy to really kind of replicate what Jamal Edrin did, even though Jamal Edrin had problems with injuries and stuff like that. But I agree with you. That's the only question mark that I have about this group, is that if, again, it's good that if your number one wide receiver is LeJohntay Wester, but you have to have a guy that has another threat of kind of catching those 50-50 balls and being really physical with the DBs. And again, I think that guys like Acion Cobb and BJ Alexander, and I think Jay Platt might be around that height. I could be wrong. I think that those guys really need to step up, and kind of show themselves. And I think that out of all the times to do it, fall camp, which is, again, going to start next week I'm probably, it's the time to do it. So I do think that that's going to be a very interesting sort of question mark going into the season, but still, the depth is there. And I'm really interested to see the chemistry that Casey Thompson or Daniel Richardson, but really Casey Thompson, can have with these guys.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a bright, one thing we know is going to be a quick offense. You lose a little bit of speed from going from N'Kosi Perry to Casey Thompson, but the offense last year at times became very one-dimensional and relied on that speed. And then when they tried to go away from that, you kind of end up watching him and wondering what their true identity was. Whereas this team can hit you from multiple different angles. The rushing game is still going to be there, and a quarterback that's a lot more comfortable with sitting there in the pocket and making reads and making throws, going to the next level instead of just honing in on his first read. An offense that is going to be able to catch defenses by surprise because they can attack them from different areas, different times. So we do know that the offense is going to have its strong suits. Still a little bit of questions, but generally feel pretty good about the offense. But the defensive side of the ball, how are we feeling going into the camp?
I will say that, and I think JJ could also add on to this as well. Just talk about that sort of defensive line, right? Because you look at a guy like Evan Anderson, right, who's, I would argue maybe the best player on the team. I mean, again, a guy, yeah, a guy that's kind of been with this team for a couple years, and again, but even kind of pairing alongside sort of Evan Anderson, which again, I just think he's just sort of a wrecker on any front of the ball, and
yeah.
Go ahead, JJ. Yeah, talk about him.
Yeah, and to add on, Evan, with Evan, you do have a Jaden Wheeler who is also on the interior defensive lineman. He's 6'3", 245 pounds, and he didn't have any sacks last year, but this year I expect a huge improvement from Jaden.
As well, a guy that, to me, besides an Evan Anderson within the defensive line that I thought could be really good was Decarius Hawthorne. There's a point in I'm trying to remember if it was last year's camp or this spring camp where Evan Anderson, actually it was during the season last season, when Evan Anderson went down for a couple games and you're kind of hoping who could kind of fill in that role. Decarius Hawthorne did that really well. Jacob Merrifield, Marlon Krakow. Speaking of depth, when we talk about running backs and receivers, defensive line is among those positions as well. Obviously, we'll talk about other parts of the defense that maybe there's way more question marks, but there's a lot of guys within defensive line that I'm interested to see how they sort of rotate them out. And obviously Rock Bellatani, who's been here, right? He was at FAU a long time ago. Now he comes back. When camp rolls around, that's going to be a question I want to ask him: is how could you what's the plan of rotating these guys when there's so many good players along the defensive line that had D1 experience? So, but again, you look at Evan Anderson and what he did, especially the weight transformation that he had last year. I did a story on that for the Palm Beach Post. He's incredible, and again, one of the best defensive players in the AAC for sure. And I've seen people make the best, maybe. But again, I think he deserves a spot there. What were we gonna say, JJ?
Evan Anderson, he's really a freak of nature. He gets through everything on the defensive line. He'll get to the quarterback. I think he had 2.5 sacks last year, and I expect that to go up a lot more this year.
Yeah, he is a true disruptor there in the middle. What do you do against a guy he's listed at 6'3", 356 pounds? That is just a massive human being that can do all sorts of damage. He didn't get the sack numbers, but very disruptive in the rushing attack. The defensive line, he's joined by some other rather large individuals. Jacob Merrifield, 6'3", 290 pounds. You see the weight being able to be thrown on both sides of the line. So definitely a strong suit in that sense. But then you go back into the linebacking crew in the secondary, and I think there's definitely more questions to be asked around there.
I agree. I think especially when it comes to inside linebacker, you have an Eddie Williams. I'm just not totally convinced about the rest of the guys. An outside linebacker, you look at a guy like Jalen Wester, who in his freshman season really showed out. Xavier Peters, you know what I'm saying? There's a couple guys, but again, it's like at the linebacker position, the college season, it's a long season. Who is going to be the guys that are going to come in and perform on a consistent level? That's the question I've had. Herman has expressed that as well. He expressed that in the spring, and he did a couple of things here in terms of recruiting and trying to get guys in here. But I do think that it's still sort of a question mark in terms of which guys are going to step up. Speaking of
the linebacker position, like you mentioned, Jalen Wester is going to be really, really good. But one guy who's a walk-on and really showed his talent in that spring game is Jaden Church. He is about to get a scholarship. I think he had 1 or 2 interceptions in that spring game and really did a good job in that spring game.
Absolutely. And I guess another position we could talk about as well is the DBs. Another sort of question mark that I have. You lose the production of Zion Gilbert, a year or two ago, and then you lose TJ Young, one of the leaders of this team. Who's gonna fill in that? Who's gonna fill in that role? I mean, Jaden Williams really had a pretty solid season, especially towards the end, and Day Hill and Armani Eli Adams. So it's gonna be really interesting to see what happens.
Yeah, it's a lot of question marks, behind Smoke Mungan as to who's going to be the next guy to step up. The defense does provide more questions than it has answers, and that's it's a beautiful thing that going to camp you get to find out just a few days out from that. So we've talked about both sides of the ball, offense a little more in depth, and the offense I think is a little bit more clear. So just looking based off what we know, and this wasn't necessarily something that I planned on talking about, but looking at both sides of the ball and going into this new conference with a new coach, with a new quarterback, we'll start with Zach on this. Do you guys think that they are going to be able to get it together in this month period of work in the fall camp, that by week 1 you think there is a legitimate chance to compete for that AAC crown?
I do. And I do think that the team firmly believes it. And you always think the team could win a lot of games, right? But I feel like that they really showed their confidence in this team when they got a Casey Thompson. When throughout the whole spring they were kind of thinking, okay, Daniel Richardson's going to be QB1. But getting a guy like Casey Thompson is really almost that final piece to maybe a championship puzzle. So I'm very interested to see where that goes. But again, I don't know. There's a lot of great teams. You have Tulane, you have UTSA, who is ranked. There's a lot of teams here that FAU will see can compete against. So I think the ranking, the preseason ranking, the media poll, which I took place in, it was at 5th place. I think that's about right, or maybe that might be over exceeding expectations. I don't know. Again, it's just like the chemistry of the team is something that usually in a first year with a first-year head coach in a new system, it's like 5th place in a new conference. That's pretty good. But again, FAU has shocked the world, right, in another sport. So I am going to say that all things can happen. Anything can happen. Never say never. So what I will say is that they're going to win some games this year. I don't think they're going to win 5 games this year. I think they're going to win more. So that's my take on it.
Yeah, I agree with Zach. I think that the 5th ranking is about right. If you took a look at this roster and said, would they win the American Conference? I probably would say their ceiling is to get 2nd and 3rd, just the roster alone. But if you actually take a look at the schedule, the 2 hardest in-conference games are Tulane, who was picked 1st to finish in the conference, and UTSA, who I believe was picked 3rd. And both those games are actually at home in the conference, which is very, very favorable for FAU. And also the schedule is very good. We don't have to play the number 2 SMU or the number 4 in Memphis. So really the schedule looks very, very good. Our 2 toughest games are maybe not our 2 toughest, but our toughest game is outside of the conference. So really our conference schedule is very easy, and I could definitely see if this FAU team, if Casey Thompson has a good season and does very, very good, I could definitely see us winning the American Conference. And like you said, you never know what's going to happen. I mean, we shocked the world in basketball, and we were picked 5th in that conference, in the conference last year too.
Yeah, there can be a lot of positive momentum that carries over from the basketball success that they had last season, and I think a big part of it is that the fans showing up and showing that they believe in the team. And if they can come away from those first 2 games, it goes Monmouth. Is Clemson the 2nd or the 3rd game?
Clemson is the 3rd game, so we have Monmouth, Ohio, Clemson, Illinois, Tulsa, USF, UTSA.
Yeah, so if you can go 2-0 in those first 2 games, you go into Clemson and there can be that shock the world mentality, but in all expectations, you start those 3 games 2-1, and you're already almost halfway towards that win total from last year, which 5 wins is certainly not a bar you want to set from yourself. But when you're coming off back-to-back 5-7 seasons, back-to-back seasons finishing below 500, back-to-back season missing a bowl game, if you can get above that 500 if you can get to that 6th win, that is the very first checkpoint to set for yourself, is to get above 500 or 500 at worst, get yourself into a bowl game. And then from there, just to continue to set yourself throughout the season marks that you want to reach. I think it would be a little bit too much of a tall task to expect them to win the conference this season. A team like Tulane, we saw how strong they were last year, beating USC in a bowl game. And that's the competition that you have to expect. That's the bar that's being set by Tulane. That's like FAU kind of sets the bar in basketball, where we won the Conference USA, and then the very first game beat the conference champs in Memphis. So a bar has been set, a very high bar by Tulane. FAU's bar is not quite there, but with that little bit lesser expectation, potentially gives the team a chance to surprise teams, especially since going into camp on our own with so many question marks, how are teams going to be able to then draw up a game plan for us?
Yeah, and to add on to that, I mean, the non-conference is pretty hard. I agree with you with the 2-1 start probably, but the Clemson and Illinois games are more winnable than we think. Illinois are losing a lot of production. They're losing their quarterback, Tommy DeVito. They're losing their running back, Chase Brown. They're losing their best defensive player, who is the number 5 pick in the NFL draft, in Devon Witherspoon, to the Seattle Seahawks. And they're losing their defensive coordinator, who had the number 1 defense in the Big Ten. So, and then with Clemson, too, they're losing DJU. And really, if we can contain Will Shipley on the defensive line, he's a really good running back, and same with Cade Klubnik. Our defense really needs to contain them. But really, I could see a 3-1 non-conference schedule, and then from there, I could see 2 losses to UTSA and Tulane. That's a 9-3 schedule. But I'm setting the bar right now. Anything under 7 wins, I'm going to be very disappointed. I mean, doing 1 game better than Coach Taggart is not ideal for this FAU team. Our expectation should be 7 wins at least. I mean, I'm having trouble finding 5 games we could lose. But there are some trap games as well.
Yeah, I mean, I completely understand both of the viewpoints. To me, it's like I've said this the past couple of seasons, and I didn't think it was that big of an ask. Make a bowl game, to me, that second season that Taggart was there, and you lose the last 4 games of the regular season, missing out on a bowl game. You do the same the next season. I think just let's get a good season. Let's get a bowl game. Hey, maybe let's win it. These are, to me, I don't think that's tall of a task. And especially when it's the first season with a new head coach, new coaching staff, besides Ed Warner or some other guys, and you have some returning players. But what I will say though is that Casey Thompson came here for a reason, and I think Herman believes that this guy is the final piece to maybe, like I said, a championship puzzle. I'm using kind of Dusty May's words when I'm saying that, mentioning players as being a final piece to a championship puzzle. And I think Casey Thompson could be that, because again, obviously, it's not a hot take to say that the quarterback is one of the most important positions on the field. Obviously, that's true. I think we've been looking for more of a consistent performer. And I think Casey Thompson could be that. He has the talent. He has the familiarity. He has the weapons. He has the team around him. I do think FAU could shock some people with those games. What I will say is that FAU has had trouble winning against teams that seem to be in bigger conferences. So like a game like Clemson, it could be winnable. Everybody wrote them off against Purdue in football, and they almost won. So again, to me, it's like maybe I'm setting the bar too low with asking for a bowl appearance. But I think that's where I see the team going. But again, anything can happen. It's college football. It is a crazy, crazy sport. So we will see what happens.
It very much is, and it is a little low to set the bar at that. But when you've gone back-to-back seasons without seeing the team even get into a bowl game, besides the fact winning one, it's a small ask. It's an ask that should be small. It is something that you shouldn't have to strive for and hope for. That's the minimum that you're getting. It's a team that has a lot of talent, has talent coming over from some Power 5 conferences, has a coach who has done really well in this conference already once with Houston. There's just so many things to be positive about, and you just hope that it doesn't sputter out. JJ, do you have anything else to add on this?
I have to hop out right now, but appreciate it.
All right. Well, actually, that's fine. So I think that's where a good spot to wrap this up at. This was the first episode of Inside the Burrow. We're going to be covering training camp as it starts next week. Not sure exactly what day that's going to be, but look out for that. And if you haven't done so already, go over and watch the interview we did with Coach Ed Warner. That came out earlier today at the time of recording. Not exactly sure when this is going to be going live, but go over there and watch that. Definitely a good interview. You can follow all of us on Twitter. Myself, Jacob at JK Production 3 or 2 underscores, yeah, at Zach Weinberger and at JJ Metz FAU. We appreciate y'all very much for watching this episode, and look out next week. We'll be right back at you guys with where we'll finally have some actual camp content. But thank you all very much for watching today. Make sure to like, subscribe, get in the comments. Let us know what you think. Let us know what you think about training camp about to start. Give us some ideas of things you'd like to hear us talk about. Thank you all very much for watching. This has been the FAU Owl's Nest Inside the Burrow. Have a great rest of your day. Take care, everybody.